Hey everybody, my name is Darren Sugiyama and I am a managing partner at Landsmark Capital. On today's webinar, we're going to talk about this AG49 monster, this AG49 Godzilla that is coming to attack the IUL industry. And if you tuned into our last webinar where I talked about the effects the AG49A will have on the life insurance industry, I know a lot of people had a lot of questions. Things like, will this new AG49A law destroy the IUL market? How bad will it be? What does all of this mean? And really, how much less income drawdowns are advisors going to be able to show coming out of IUL products? Well, Pacific Life was one of the first carriers to update their carrier illustration software to reflect these new AG49A limits or restrictions. And what we did is we ran a case that we previously run about 2 weeks ago. We reran it with the new updated software restrictions, and we found that the income drawdowns in that particular design was over 60% less. In other words, you're only going to be able to show about a third of the income drawdowns out of these IUL products than you have previously been used to. So what we're going to do today on this webinar is show you a real-life example of what exactly are those differences. So let's go ahead and get started here. Most of the advisors on this webinar are already aware of the old AG49 law that limits the maximum index credit that an advisor can illustrate on a carrier illustration. Pretty much everyone knows that. Those maximum index crediting rates were basically established by taking the average of every 25-year run stretched back over the last 65 years. So we already know about the AG49 illustrated rates limitation, but what the new AG49A restriction is going to implement are two major things that will impact how an IUL looks on a carrier illustration. The first one is that if the product has a multiplier bonus element, if you run the illustration with that multiplier turned on, the illustration will not take into consideration the multiplier bonus. However, it will subtract the multiplier charge, which is typically a percentage of asset charge. So long story short, if you like the idea of showing your client an IUL with a multiplier bonus option on it, you are not going to be able to show that in the carrier illustration. In fact, it will look even worse than running a standard vanilla non-multiplier illustration because it is going to deduct the multiplier charges but will not show the multiplier bonus credit. The second major change of this AG49A law is going to be that you are going to be limited to show a maximum of a 50 basis point positive spread or positive arbitrage between the illustrated rate in the carrier illustration and the participating loan rate. Previously, the maximum spread was 1%, and then now that is being compressed to only a 50 basis point positive arbitrage. So the question is, what does this all mean, right? So what? How much is that really going to affect the illustration and the numbers in your value proposition? Well, let's take a look. So what we have on the screen here, this is a case we ran a couple weeks ago, and this was using our proprietary omakase pension alternative structure. This is a version of premium financing that our firm specializes in. And as you see here, this was a Pacific Life PS6 product, and we use the Performance Plus multiplier. In this particular version, the illustrated rate is 5.41% in terms of the gross index credit. Obviously, we have the multiplier bonus on there as well. And what happens here is the client in the illustration would be able to pull down $228,000 of income per year for a period of 20 years. Again, this is pre-AG49A in what you could run. This particular illustration was run on September 23rd of 2020. Again, we used the Performance Plus multiplier crediting method. This illustration included both the multiplier charge as well as the multiplier credit. And again, it was run at a rate of 5.41% and assumed a participating loan rate of 4.65%. That was a 76 basis point positive arbitrage spread between the index credit of the policy and the participating loan rate. So this is what we would have shown a client under those design parameters. So what we did is just last week, we ran the exact same illustration with the exact same 5.41% assumed index credit, but under the new AG49A restrictions when it comes to how we illustrate the policy. And here's what it looks like. So remember, pre-AG49A, the income drawdown was $228,000 a year for 20 years. Let's take a look at the exact same policy using the new AG49A restrictions. So here we see now the client can only pull down, in the illustration, $72,000 in annual income for a period of 20 years. So why is that? Well, we ran this illustration on October 15th, 2020. So again, this is post AG49A restrictions in the Pacific Life Navigator carrier illustration software. We ran this again with the Performance Plus multiplier. In this case, the multiplier charge was applied. However, no multiplier credit was applied in these numbers that we're looking at here. We ran this again using a 5.41% index credit. However, if we look on the left-hand side of the screen there in red, it says the participating loan rate, even though the current participating loan rate is 4.65%, the illustrated participating loan rate now had to be illustrated at 4.91%, which is essentially 50 basis points less than the illustrated index crediting rate of 5.41%. So the reason for the drastic drop in income, again, $228,000 a year in annual income drawdown, crushed down to only $72,000, was multifold. First is because we did not get any benefit of the multiplier bonus. We have the multiplier charge creating a drag on the cash value performance, and the positive arbitrage between the 5.41% index credit and the participating loan rate was limited to now to only 50 basis points, whereas before, industry-wide, you could have a positive arbitrage of 1%. So huge difference. I showed this to an advisor just yesterday, and one of their questions was, well, what would happen if you illustrated the exact same policy using the classic crediting method? In other words, no multiplier charge, no multiplier credit. In that particular situation, we'll take a look at this, run again at the same 5.41% assumed index credit. We see an annual income drawdown of $84,000. So again, this illustration was run on October 15th, 2020. Again, this is the classic, which means that there is no multiplier charge and no multiplier credit applied to the crediting method. Again, 5.41% index credit and a participating loan rate of 4.91%. Again, even though the actual participating loan rate right now is 4.65%, the illustration software is going to force a participating loan rate of 4.91%, which is 50 basis points less than the 5.41% index credit. Again, this is all AG49A compliant. That's the funny thing about compliance is that the spirit of having compliance is very positive, right? It's to protect the client from being shown something that was very unrealistic, something where the advisor could be tempted to overpromise, and then the index performance would underdeliver what the advisor had illustrated. And so I'm a very much a very large supporter, big supporter of that element of compliance, because we want to protect the client, right? We want to make sure that an advisor is not tempted to overpromise and then ends up under-delivering. However, these new AG49A restrictions really show a client something that is so unrealistic, that is very unlikely to exist in the future, And so in the last webinar that I did last week about this issue, the analogy I used was it would be like trying to sell a Lamborghini that did 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds and had a horsepower of 690 horsepower. That's what the current Lamborghini Aventador actually does. It would be the equivalent of trying to sell that car, but Lamborghini being restricted in their product brochure to show a horsepower of only 490 horsepower versus 690 horsepower. And it would be the equivalent of, in that brochure, them having to say that it only did 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds, when in actuality it does 2.5 seconds. It would be very misleading to the client. And that is essentially what this AG49A law is essentially going to do to the carrier illustrations. So at Landsmark Capital, we have a very unique, well, actually more than unique, a proprietary in-house software program that can deconstruct the policy using the policy data. We input that data into our proprietary software. We calculate, or we input rather, the policy premium. We apply the charges and credits to mirror how the policy credits, and we create a hypothetical synthetic index model that shows, again, the same contributions, the same charges, and we apply that crediting method to this synthetic hypothetically produced index account. So we can show what that construction would have produced over several different back-tested periods of time. On this next slide here, I'm going to show you, before we get into the back-testing, I'm going to show you the summary of difference between pre-AG49 and post-AG49A carrier illustrated numbers. So what's on the screen here, this is pre-AG49A. This is run again on September 23rd. We used Performance Plus and used an index crediting rate of 5.41%. We ran that exact same illustration just a few days ago using the current post-AG49A restricted values. Again, we used Performance Plus, ran that at 5.41%. And then we also ran the classic version where there is no multiplier charge and there's no multiplier credit. We ran that again at 5.41% as well. Let's take a look at the comparison here. The participating loan rate in this particular policy is actually 4.65%, right? That is the actual participating loan rate. However, based on the AG49A restrictions, it forces the participating loan rate in the illustration to calculate the numbers based off of a participating loan rate of 4.91%, which currently isn't even the actual participating loan rate, but it forces that to be AG49A compliant. Again, that 4.91% is 50 basis points less than the illustrated rate, which in this case is 5.41%. If we look across the board here, the income drawdown difference, and again, this is the exact same product, exact same client, exact same everything. The only difference is that the two on the right-hand side of the screen are illustrated under the current AG49A restricted properties. So income drawdown in the pre-AG49A restricted parameters in the illustration showed an income drawdown of $228,000. In the exact same setup, post AG49A, it shows an income drawdown of only $72,000. And when we took the exact same client, exact same product, and did not include any multipliers on it at all, again, they call this the classic, the income drawdown was $84,000. So if we look at the comparison, pre-AG49A compared to post-AG49A, which is what we're calling this the current environment, we're talking about, if we're showing the Performance Plus, 68% less income coming out of the policy. And if we're showing the current classic version of the exact same product, it is 63% less income coming out of the policy. You're talking about only showing a client a third of the income. that should really be coming out of the policy. This is absolutely insane. And so the question is, how do we show the client the truth? How do we show them the transparent numbers that would result from actual real life scenarios? So again, what we do at Landsmark Capital, our proprietary software runs several different back-tested S&P historical returns. One of the ones we use is pretty simple. It's just the last 40 years of the S&P performance. When we look at the last 40 years of the S&P, that's the year 2019 rolling back to 1980. When we take the actual historical S&P performance, not including S&P dividends, then we apply the floor and cap to that historical data. In this case, we're showing a 0% floor, an 11% cap, which is in line with Pacific Life's high cap crediting method, in which case they charge an 80 basis point asset-based charge. When we did that, the average return pre-charges over that 40-year period is 7.05%. Okay, again, that's the average index credit pre-charges based on the last 40 years of the S&P, not including dividends, and applying a 0% floor and an 11% cap. Okay. When we look at the last 20 years of the S&P performance, under those same parameters, we have an average index credit of 6.21%. Again, this is pre-charges and not including the multiplier bonus. When we look at the current AG49A compliant carrier illustration, again, we're going to compare the classic, so no multiplier charge, no multiplier credit, and we're using a 5.41% static return every single year. When we compare all of these using the applicable participating loan rate in our look-back synthetically produced index accounts, where we're mimicking the crediting methods and charges of this product, again, in our hypothetical synthetic index accounts, we are using a 4.65% participating loan rate, which is the actual participating loan rate in that Pacific Life product. In the current AG49A compliant carrier illustration, it's going to automatically push up that participating loan rate to 4.91%, which isn't even what it actually is. That is just, again, a forced increase in participating loan rate to be AG49 compliant in the carrier illustration. When all is said and done, we take a look at what that produces in terms of income. The 40-year look-back scenario would have produced $429,962 in annual income. Again, that is in the hypothetical synthetically produced index account that just so happens to mimic all of the same premiums going in, or the contributions going in to that hypothetical account that would go into the policy. Again, the crediting methods are duplicated, as are the multiplier charges and multiplier credits, and in this case, the high cap charge of 80 bips, raising the cap up to 11%, up from 8.5. So 429,000. In the last 20 years, in our synthetically produced index account, we're showing an income of $243,000 a year. However, in the carrier illustration, it shows an income of 84 grand. I mean, you're talking about a huge difference in outcome. In the 40-year look back, that would have produced 5.11 times more than the carrier illustration. In the 20-year look back, that would have produced 2.89 times more income. And so again, I'm an ex-high school teacher from Hawaii, right? That was my first career out of college. Gosh, that was a long time ago. But when I was 22 years old, I started teaching high school. And so my background, I'm an educator, right? My master's degree is in multicultural education at the secondary level. And so I approach everything from an educational standpoint. I want the client to understand how the product actually works. As a former educator, actually I'm still a current educator, I'm still educating clients how these products actually work. And the only way to compliantly show a client, educate a client how this product actually works, is to show them and teach them the crediting methods, how the floor works, how the cap works, how the charges work, how the multiplier charges work, how the multiplier credits work, and how the high cap charge works and the high cap works. When we do that, the only way to do that is to produce a synthetic hypothetical index account using those parameters. At the moment, Landsmark Capital is not only the only premium financing intermediary firm that has the software to do this, we are the only firm in the life insurance space that has the ability to produce these numbers. So from a value proposition, if you're going to finance a policy, who do you want to finance it with? Do you want to finance it with someone that doesn't have the ability to show your client the truth and educate your client how the floors and caps and crediting methods and charges actually work and actually show them income drawdowns that are in line with that mathematical truth? In this case, between $429,000 a year and $243,000 a year. Or do you want to show your client an $84,000 a year drawdown that's based on parameters that have very little to do with the truth, very little to do with historical performance, and are painting a picture that is not even indicative of how the product actually works? This is an absolute crime, in my humble opinion. So, there's a lot of different options you have out there when it comes to premium financing. There are a lot of different intermediary firms you can work with. We are the only one, as I said, that can actually show the historical returns and show the client how all of these elements actually work. And in reality, the numbers that our software is going to be able to show a client are dramatically greater than the carrier illustration. Again, how many times greater? Oh, just 2.89 times to 5 times greater. So again, you can always find an intermediary to do it for cheaper than us, right? We're definitely not the cheapest act in town. But as you see here on the screen here, if you're going to get a tattoo, sure, there are a lot of tattoo artists that can do it for cheaper than a master, but you're going to end up with a product that does not look as good as you would have hoped it looked. And when it comes to math, not only does it not look as good, it isn't as good, it is not realistic, and it is not illustrative of the mathematical truth of how these products actually work. So for more information, you can go to our website, landsmarkcapital.com. Last year, my business partner Jeff Fain and I published this book called The Definitive Book on Premium Financing: The Good, Bad, Ugly, and Insane Practices Used in a Controversial Industry. You can buy this book on Amazon. You can also download the ebook version of this at no cost to you on our website, landsmarkcapital.com. And again, with this new AG 489A law coming down the pike that's going to go active in late November, which is, we're just, a month away. It's crazy how time flies here. A month away. Currently, Pacific Life is the only carrier that has their illustration software updated to be AG 49A compliant. These other carriers are going to make these updates as they interpret AG 49A requiring them to do. But if you are a producer and you are selling IULs, especially if you're selling accumulation-based IULs for future income drawdowns, the restrictions of AG 49A are going to make those carrier illustrations look really, really awful compared to the truth. In addition to that, if you're looking to do premium financing cases, I'll tell you what, a lot of these intermediaries that are doing this interest accrual or these free insurance programs, these programs are going to get absolutely decimated when it comes to AG 49A because they're largely relying on a pretty substantial positive arbitrage between the illustrated index credit in the policy and the participating loan rate. When that is now getting compressed down to only 50 basis points, you're going to see some of these firms have major problems when it comes time to run in-force illustrations. And the last thing you want to do is be a year or 2 or 3 into a policy, and when it comes time for a policy review, their in-force illustration with those new parameters is going to make it very difficult to explain to the client why the cash value is illustrated much less than what you sold them 1, 2, 3 years ago. So again, Check us out at lionsmarkcapital.com. I'm Darren Sugiyama, one of the managing partners at Lionsmark Capital. We're more than happy to take a look at some of the cases you have coming up. And again, if you did not tune into our webinar last week, you can actually watch it on demand at our website. Again, lionsmarkcapital.com. On our homepage, just scroll down and click on videos, and that will jump you to our video jukebox where we have several different recorded past webinars that we've done available for you to watch on demand at no cost. So take a look at that. Again, we look forward to working with you guys soon. This AG49A monster is right around the corner, guys. If you haven't figured it out already, this is going to drastically and radically change the IUL industry. And as a lot of agents are telling me, this is going to put a lot of agents out of business unless you have the ability to illustrate what I'm talking about on this webinar. So if there was ever a time to engage with us at Lionsmark Capital, now is the time to do it. Guys, have a great day. It's been great. And again, check us out, lionsmarkcapital.com. Talk to you guys soon.